Hello and good evening. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran and you're watching Gravitas on WION, the definitive Indian channel with a global perspective that brings you top stories from South Asia and around the world. First up, the headlines. Indian-American lawmakers say that Trump's new travel ban doesn't make America safe. Afghanistan has no secret agreements with India, says Afghan President Ashraf Ghani's chief advisor. Iraqi forces retake government headquarters and museum in Mosul. And China warns of consequences over deployment of US anti-missile system. All right, over the next 1 hour, we'll have a distinguished panel of experts joining us to debate two important issues. One, concerning the alarming rise of hate crimes against Indians abroad. We ask, is there an unmistakable economic basis to the hate crimes targeting Indians and persons of Indian origin alike? Do the recent incidents of hate crime in the US in particular have as much to do with economy and jobs, or the lack of it, as, say, political issues such as immigration or issues such as multiculturalism and integration? In the second debate tonight on Gravitas, we discuss about a country in our immediate neighborhood and its bilateral relationship with India. No, we're not talking about Pakistan. We will, in fact, be looking east to Bangladesh. And if you're wondering why Bangladesh and why now, well, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina of Bangladesh will undertake a much-anticipated visit to India soon, and it is as good an occasion as any to take stock of the relationship. We have an exclusive conversation lined up for you, but more on that later. First up on Gravitas tonight, we ask, are Indians no longer welcome in America? 3 attacks on Indians in 13 days, leaving 2 of them dead. And for many Indians and persons of Indian origin alike, the American dream doesn't seem that rosy anymore. The killings happened in places not generally known for racist violence. Now, Kansas, where Indian engineer Srinivas Kuchibotla was shot dead, is in the Midwest, while Harnish Patel was murdered in Lancaster in South Carolina on the East Coast. Another person of Indian origin, Deep Rai, was shot at and injured in Washington state in the far west. But in at least 2 of the cases, the attackers shouted at them to leave the country. Now, does this reflect a widely held sentiment among Americans? It's hard to say, but this video shot and posted on a website called SaveAmericanITJobs.com by one Steve Pushor, an American computer programmer, has garnered more than 41,000 views. Take a look.
Not that great a serve. You see, this whole area is all Indian. Amazing. And people are taking the camera out, and kids everywhere, people. It's just an amazing number of the year before. It's a mini Mumbai. And there's the American flag, man. What's up with that? We need to change the color of this thing. Change it to a different, not Americana we all know and love. I'm not saying it's bad or good. I'm just worried about the people that used to have jobs. They no longer have work here.
Now, the video titled Welcome to Columbus, Ohio suburbs, let's take a walk to Indian Park, features footage of Indian families. It says that wealthy Indian families have moved into homes in Ohio as, quote, displacement of Americans has occurred, unquote. Now, a message posted on the site says, and I quote again, Ohio rich suburban park is occupied by rich Indians with various green $H1B, L1 and H4 visas. A $60,000 Porsche SUV and a big BMW were sighted at the Indian Park cricket match. It is called Occupy and Displacement. What happened to the people who used to live there? They lost their jobs to people from foreign countries, unquote. Another one reads, and again I quote, the website labels Indian IT companies Infosys, Wipro, HCL and Tata Consultancy Services as the, wait, Indian IT mafia. Yes, you heard that right. Indian IT mafia. It accuses these firms of violating the US laws in league with, quote, greedy US corporations, unquote. It has resulted in American IT professionals training their H-1B or L-1 Indian replacements in order to receive severance pay. This is outrageous, unquote. So, are Indians displacing Americans? The US does suffer from a shortage of skilled technical personnel. This is because American students are not going for science and technology courses. So skilled Indians, among others, are being brought into the US. America needs to hike wages to draw its people into science, but this will take time. All right, to discuss and debate this and the related issues, I am now joined by Glenn Call, an American writer and former intelligence officer who joins us from Boston in the US. Also joining me soon in the studio will be Pramit Pal Chaudhary, foreign editor of Hindustan Times newspaper. And we hope to be joined again by Arun Vishwanath, associate professor in the Department of Communication at the University of Buffalo in the US. Thank you, Glenn, and I hope to have more guests join me on Gravitas tonight. But coming to you, Glenn, first. Over the last few weeks, we in India have been having animated conversations about the so-called Trump's America in general and the safety and security of Indians and Indian Americans in particular. Now, before we open up the debate, Glenn, I want you to set out or lay out your concerns, your larger concerns, be it political, diplomatic, cultural or economic, in the light of the recent attacks on immigrants in general.
Well, the attacks are a manifestation of the broad social and political struggle and shifts, arguments that are ongoing in the United States and that have come to a head with the election of Donald Trump. There's a long history in, I think, all societies, certainly all industrial societies, but in the United States, at least I can speak definitively, of a populist reaction, a working class reaction, and a nativist reaction to two things, strong levels of immigration and rapid economic change, where old jobs are being replaced by higher technology, more modern, cutting-edge jobs. The conservative and now actually the far-right view is that America has been deindustrialized by immigration and by foreign competition. Both of these explanations are profoundly wrong, but they are believed sincerely by probably 35%, 40% of the population. And they therefore resent the higher educated, better job holding, higher paid immigrants who also do bring social, cultural change.
Right.
I would say a strong majority of Americans support this, but it always only takes a small minority to disrupt a larger social group.
Indeed, Glenn, we've seen that Indian nationals and US nationals of Indian origin alike have been targeted. Now, has President Donald Trump said or done enough to reassure people not only in the US but around the world?
Well, I wish that the premise of the question were correct, which is that one would anticipate that the leader of the nation would try to address the wrongdoing and to keep people calm and focused on social harmony and actual true causes of social stress. But it's quite clear that the uptick in hostility to different ethnic groups and the divisions and focus of some part of American society on immigrant communities is the direct result of Donald Trump's rhetoric, which he both exploits these attitudes and he foments and incites them. So unfortunately, no, he has not done enough. In fact, the blame can be placed directly at his feet for this rise in social tension.
All right, while we wait for Pramit Pal Chaudhary to join this debate on Gravitas, I'll take my next question back to you, Glenn. Now, Muslims, Jews, Hindus and Sikhs all have come under attack in the US of late. But do you think it is religious groups that are the actual targets, or is it immigrants generally, or both?
Well, it's both, but the phenomenon of resentment and hostility to the other really is centered in a white Protestant, not exclusively Protestant, but a white conservative, working class and rural section of American society. These are the Americans who, frankly, 160 years ago fought the Civil War for the South, defending slavery, who resent and are hostile to the different people who are different. 150 years ago, there was a movement in the United States called the Know Nothing movement. It was very powerful. It was a political party even, and they were hostile. These were white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Americans who were hostile to the large numbers of Irish Catholics coming from Ireland. And they had signs up that said no Irish need apply. They were not allowed to come in. Now, why was the reaction so hostile? There was the religious Protestant Catholic argument that is centuries old, but there was also an economic one, which is that these largely uneducated laborers from Ireland took jobs from the working class white English Americans. And yet it's the Irish and the Chinese who built the railroad that brought the West and the East Coast together in 1869. So just as the Indians and the Chinese immigrants today are driving Silicon Valley and technological change, without them, the American economy would not be cutting edge and there would not be jobs. But this is an argument that unfortunately is one step too sophisticated. People see someone who looks different, they find themselves struggling, they don't have a degree in engineering or computer science, and they resent the person who is becoming the have as opposed to the have-not. It's a classic phenomenon. It's a terrible one, and it is, I think, the defining social political issue in America and probably Western Europe today.
Right, Glenn, African Americans were attacked under President Obama, and we are now seeing that immigrants have been attacked under Trump. Now, bad things have happened under both presidents, so why demonize Trump, some would ask?
Well, you can make the argument that Trump is simply the product of this social unrest and the social change due to globalization, to the impact of social economic changes globally on the American economy and society. That is true, but then you get into a chicken and egg argument, and it's almost futile to spend too much time on that, because it is also certain that the rhetoric on which Trump bases his positions, to the extent that he has any, are nationalist, racist, xenophobic, isolationist, and hostile, although it's never said quite explicitly, hostile to the other. And the other is anyone who is not an American who speaks English as I do and looks as I do. That's the fundamental root. Now, the Republican Party will deny that this is the case, but it is a fact, and it's objectively demonstrable with all sorts of data, that for 50 years, certainly 40, the Republican Party has based its electoral positions on appeals to an aggrieved white class of Americans who feel besieged and that things are happening out of their control. That's a fact. And at some point, if you base your policies on racial division, then you'll start to see this kind of violence. And this is why, happily, I think a strong majority of Americans are appalled by this and oppose it. But a motivated minority is stronger, one for one in a sense, than a dispersed and less zealous majority. And that's, I'm afraid, the political issue and now the social one, too, that we're struggling with.
Indeed. Glenn, I'll request you to stay on while I bring in Pramith into the debate tonight. Welcome, Pramith, to Gravitas. I want to begin by posing you two questions which I posed to Glenn before now. Over the last few weeks, we in India have had animated conversations generally about the safety and security of Indians and persons of Indian origin in the US. Now, in your estimation, what would be some of the larger concerns for us or the Indian society in general and the Indian government in particular, be it political, diplomatic, cultural or economic? Your thoughts, Pramith?
Well, there's one very clear one, which is the issue of the H-1 visas
Right.
and the flow of skilled workers. So HL visas, these are categories that have helped drive the Indian IT services industry. Now, that is a model that's slowly dying for other reasons, automation and voice technology. But obviously, we would prefer that to die as slowly as possible. And not having H visas and L visas would reduce the IT industry's capacity to generate revenues
Right.
and employment in India as elsewhere. So that's obviously an immediate issue. There's a larger issue, which is that the Indian-American community in the United States now, it is actually the single largest incoming legal migration into the United States now. It's overtaken the Chinese,
Right.
and it's now overtaken even the Mexicans, who have traditionally been the largest source of migration into the United States. But in terms of legal migration, Indians are now the largest. And it's a community of over 4 million now that's growing at the rate of about 20 to 25% a year. And as you know, it's the most educated per capita, the wealthiest. It's considered a model immigrant population by almost anybody you talk to, whether Republican or Democrat, when I go there at least. And that has built an unusual relationship between India and the United States that never existed before. We've never had this is the largest Indian diaspora in the world now, and it is by far the most successful.
Right.
I mean, it is a quantum level more successful than any other Indian population in the world. In fact, it's more successful than Indians back in India. And this relationship is now driving, building a relationship or helping underpin a relationship between the world's two largest democracies that is really almost historical in its potential transformation. And unfortunately, this is the question now, is that the Trump presidency, by at least talking, they haven't actually done anything yet, talking about restricting even legal migration,
Right.
or considering that even illegal migration doesn't really matter to us because it's a very small number of
Sure.
Indians. But restricting skilled migration, legal migration, making it harder to get a green card, as these ideas are at least floating around the administration, it potentially will bring an end to this unusual historical development that we're seeing right now. And that, for me, would be the single largest potential danger that is posited by the Trump administration.
Fair enough. But we also heard and seen President Trump make the right noises, as it were, on the issue of hate crimes in particular,
Yes.
targeting Indians and persons of Indian origin alike. Now, in your estimation, has President Donald Trump said or done enough to reassure people at large, both in the US and in India?
Well, you have to keep saying it. The point is, it's not just a one-off. He's had said soon after his inauguration, he had urged that people about these type of crimes. He said, stop it. Then, as you mentioned, in the State of the Union address, which
Right.
is obviously a very important statement, he came out, he actually cited the Kansas City attack. Now, it's interesting. Now, after 9/11, I'll give you an example, George Bush repeatedly came out and said that attacks against Muslims and so on, he had Eid, celebrations in the White House, he had Diwali. He deliberately went out of his way to try and stop and send a signal
Right.
that the White House does not endorse any attacks against Muslims or any, attacks against people who look like Muslims, which is what is happening in some cases. And it seemed to have had an effect. Seems to be statistical evidence that a message from the president over a period of time slowly delegitimizes such attacks, and you start to see a slow drop.
Absolutely.
And so in Trump's case, there has been a drop, at least after the initial 10 days of his inauguration. But he has to keep saying this. He has to keep sounding presidential about these. So he has to recognize, and hopefully he will recognize, that if these attacks continue, he has to keep coming out and saying that it's
So
not.
the buck has to stop with him.
The president always has to set the environment for what is good and what is bad as far as the country is concerned.
All right, coming to you now, Glenn. Now, we've saw Indians and persons of Indian origin being targeted in New York and California, now both blue states, Democrat that is. We also saw them being attacked in places such as the red states, the Republican-leaning states of South Carolina or Florida, for instance. Now, what does that tell you about the America of today?
Well, the electoral map that underpins your description of the U.S., the red and blue states, we all use as a handy reference way of thinking of the country. And it's certainly true that the Northeast, where I am now, is quite different from the Deep South. That is true. Nonetheless, in Massachusetts, where I am, probably the bluest state in the country, the vote between, we'll call them progressives and conservatives, is 55 to 45%, I mean, roughly speaking. And in Texas, the heartland of much of this movement that supports Trump, the vote is maybe 55 or 57 in favor of the conservatives versus 45 or 43. So the nation, yes, is divided, but even in the bluest or the reddest states, the margin of difference is relatively small. It is a broadly or evenly divided society geographically on the whole. So I don't think we can infer too much, although, you know, the support for this kind of populist nativism is stronger in the South and in the Middle West and weaker on the coasts.
Indeed, now there is an economic angle to all of this, isn't it, Glenn? Now, Pramit was talking about the economic aspects, be the issue of H-1B visas, for instance, or generally about curbing other legal migratory routes. Now, it manifests itself in some of these issues. So what can the government of the U.S. do to reassure governments in India and around the world, especially the services industry, the IT industry, which plays a key role in countries such as India?
Well, I think our colleague in the program put his finger on it, that the power of the presidency, of the leadership, of any leadership, is tremendous. I can give a concrete, narrower example from my own career. Very sadly, some may recall that I was involved in the torture, the enhanced interrogation program for years, and I've spent 15 years trying to oppose this. But polling of Americans, just to be very brief, polling of Americans prior to 9/11, 15 years ago, concerning torture, showed strong majorities found that absolutely un-American. It was inconceivable that Americans would engage in this. Polling of Americans who have come to maturity after 9/11, when there were more sympathetic noises and defenses raised by or expressed by political leaders, these people, these Americans, are far more sympathetic to, frankly, torture. And it's directly the consequence of how public perception is shaped by the leadership. It is not immutable. And if the leader leads and speaks in favor of racial, ethnic, and economic harmony among the various groups of the country, attitudes will shift. It falls directly on the shoulders of and at the feet of our leaders, which means Donald Trump.
All right, Glenn and Pramit, I'll ask you to stay on, please. There's news just coming in from the United Kingdom, where the London Bridge area has been evacuated as police investigate a security alert in the area after reports of a suspicious vehicle in the area. Office workers were told to stay indoors and away from windows, and the bus station and part of the train station were cleared of passengers after officers were called to a security alert in London Bridge Street on Tuesday afternoon. The road bridge was also closed to traffic, and some buildings, including a gym and a cocktail bar, were evacuated. Disruption is expected in the train service in the area as well. A police disposal robot was deployed on the scene as part of the ongoing investigation. So this is news just coming in from London in the UK. All right, for more on this story, we're now joined by WION's London Bureau Chief, Mandy Clark. Good evening, Mandy. What more details do you have at this moment?
Well, a bit more information is coming in. Certainly, London police authorities are on high alert, and The terror threat in London has been on severe for some time. Now, the Metropolitan Police have just put out a notice saying now roads are reopening, that they have searched. It was a bomb scare, but they have found no dangerous or suspicious elements. They thank the public for bearing with them. But we can expect a lot more of these incidents because London is certainly under threat. So when there is a bomb scare, the police are not shy to do what they did today, which is close down a big area. They stopped the trains from coming in, and they took it very seriously, deploying a police robot. But thankfully, it turned out to be a false alarm, and roads are now reopening.
All right, Mandy, thank you for your inputs. This was news just coming in from London, where the London Bridge area has been evacuated following a security threat. You were listening to Mandy Clark, WION's London bureau chief there. All right, coming back to the Gravitas debate and coming to you, Pramit. Now, outsourcing, was as much a problem for Obama as it is for Trump, for instance. Now, we heard Obama talk about in the year 2009 of the jobs being lost from Buffalo to Bangalore. We heard him use the slogan, say no to Bangalore and yes to Buffalo. And Trump today talks about America first and buy American and hire American. So what's the difference in the salience of the argument, as it were? Is there any difference at all in their priorities?
Well, the difference was that Obama did what a lot of Democratic presidents did, like also Bill Clinton, I should add, which is to make symbolic noises about saying that I oppose outsourcing. But on the ground, in terms of actual legislation, he never actually did anything. And he would tend to let Congress make the call as to whether or not the number of H-1B visas would drop or fall. But it would essentially tweak the policy, but there wouldn't be any major shifts. So you saw H-1Bs go up and down largely on the basis of demand in the industry. Trump, at least initially, came out saying that he actually felt some action had to be taken about immigration that was resulting in job losses. And definitely there are people in his team like Steve Bannon who very strongly oppose this idea or strongly believe that immigration is an issue. Again, though, so far we haven't actually seen any action. Even in the State of the Union address, he doesn't attack outsourcing, he attacks offshoring, which is the transfer of factories out of the United States, mainly to China, some of it to Mexico, with the subsequent loss of manufacturing jobs, which of course is not really happening in India. So it seems so far that if India is lucky, the primary focus of his immigration policy will be offshoring, in which China and Mexico will be the victims, not us, and illegal migrants, in which India is not a major, Indians at least are not major, not a large number of, and outsourcing and the issue of skilled worker migration and legal migration as a whole will basically take a lower end job or be a lower priority for him. In which case we may at least see a couple of years in which nothing will happen. And finally, I should add that Congress makes the final call. This is not something that can be done in executive order. It requires legislation. And what was interesting, which is one of the reasons why presidents like Obama and Clinton could get away with symbolic action, is that Republicans traditionally were supporters of H and L visas. It was Republican congressmen and states like California, where the Silicon Valley tech industry was very strong. These lobbies, the combination of lobbies and supporters of immigration, who tended to ensure that H and L visas and the entire immigration and outsourcing problem more or less stayed in a symbolic box. Again, right now, clearly, the Republican Congress that is in power, those Republican leaders are not opposed to outsourcing. They've never opposed H and L. There are a number of congressmen who have now put legislation on the table, both Democrats and Republicans, and that's been the tradition. In fact, it's the same names who have traditionally done it in the past who are now putting that. But we have unusuals, whether it's Steve Bannon, Jeff Sessions, people who are opposed to outsourcing actually being part of the administration, which was not normally the case before. So that's going to be, again, we don't yet know what will happen on the ground in terms of actual ground reality. But that's going to be that's so far the big shift with Trump.
Indeed. Coming to you now, Glenn, do you think the Trump administration has thought through some of the consequences of their policies, be it on immigration or on visas? For instance, how are the American companies or the industry reacting to the immigration curbs or this hostile narrative, as it were?
Well, I think you were reading my mind. Your question anticipates where I was thinking of speaking. I think we will quickly find that Donald Trump makes a similar discovery concerning immigration policy and the outsourcing, the economic protectionism issues that he has discovered with regard to the health care issue in the United States, in which he said, whoever knew that it was such a complicated issue, which is literally, in my case, a laughable observation for someone to make at that point. But he'll find that, as my colleague was talking about, the last time there was a serious immigration reform effort was under President Reagan 30 years ago now. And it wasn't only the high-end visas, high-skilled visas, H-1B
right,
and so on, that the Republicans defended. When push came to shove and a decision had to be made, large businesses, agro-businesses, which were strong supporters of the Republican Party, shot down the ultimate reform, which would have made it illegal to hire an illegal alien. Because without the illegal aliens, immigrants, the agro-industry would collapse. So when the reality is faced, the policy has to be more nuanced, if not paralyzed. Because similarly, let's take a high-end company like IBM or Boeing, say. Much of their business now depends on the high-skilled experts without which the company wouldn't exist, who come from China and India, or now we should say in China, and who sell a substantial portion of their products overseas. So if you take steps to address outsourcing and immigration without in any way in line with the nationalist, populist, isolationist rhetoric of the Trump campaign, you'll find that you will defeat the purposes you claim to support, and he will discover this.
All right, Glenn, very quickly, most American IT companies, say in the Silicon Valley, have been a consequence of the enterprise shown by immigrants. So my question in conclusion, why demonize immigrants? Glenn?
Well, because immigrants look different, talk different, eat different, and take jobs that people imagine they should have but are not qualified for. It's a visceral social phenomenon that is being exploited.
All right, on that note, I want to thank Glenn Carl for joining the Gravitas discussion tonight. Pramith will stay on for the next debate on Gravitas. But before that, time for a short break. More news on the other side. Stay tuned to Gravitas.